Hey everybody, so no natural light tonight, unfortunately. Apologies for that, but not really because I don't care about providing you natural light all that much. Either way, I wanted to discuss the perennial topic of why so many damn Democrats are running for president. Now, I touched on this with respect to Bill de Blasio yesterday, and I wanted to go into a little bit more depth because I had a piece come out today in The Spectator, which of course I'll link to in the description box, outlining the reasons why Bill de Blasio is running for president. And I did that not to fixate so much on Bill de Blasio, although he has a lot of interesting characteristics in his own right, perversely interesting in a way, but because he actually provides a prism through which to understand what's going on with the more structural issues around the presidential electoral process and gives insight into why so many people are running for president. And we've now reached 24, which smashes all historical records. So we're reaching a new era here, and there's got to be some underlying reasons for it that haven't been adequately sussed out yet. One of them, of course, is just this general sense of politicization under Trump. So, I've heard so many anecdotes, and there's some polling data to back this up, that, since 2016, huge numbers of people are far more engaged with American national politics than they previously had been, because under Obama, there didn't seem to be this constant, never-ending cycle of crisis. Now, that's not to say everything was perfect under Obama, because far from it. But there's just this ongoing, nonstop tension now. It's promulgated by the media in particular, which gives the impression that there's crisis constantly looming. So I think that just impels people to devote more of their daily lives to politics, which you could argue is kind of unhealthy in that it has, I think, some detrimental psychological impacts. On the other hand, if it spurs genuine civic engagement, it can be a good thing, but I think, there are some trade-offs there. But I just want to quote to you a finding from a recent Fox News poll, which kind of illustrates this point. And by the way, Fox News themselves does not conduct the poll. They commission it. So if you want to dismiss a poll because Fox News publishes it, you're silly. Anyway, between May 11th and May 14th, they gauged to what extent people are interested in the 2020 presidential election. And they found that 57% of people are extremely interested in the 2020 presidential election as of now, May 2019. And you want to know why that's so bonkers? They posed the same question to people in November of 2016, so the height of the general election, this unprecedented general election with Hillary and Trump and everything that was going on. And you want to know how many people responded that they were extremely interested in what was going on? 54%. So fewer people, granted within the margin of error, but nonetheless, fewer people said that they were extremely interested in the 2016 presidential election at the peak in November of 2016 than they do now, whatever it is, 18 months prior to the election. That's just insanity, and that reflects this broader trend of politicization, which we saw manifest in the midterm elections last year. The 2018 midterm saw the highest turnout for a midterm election since 1914. Think about that. It's crazy. And it wasn't just the Democratic side either, who you expect to be somewhat energized due to their opposition to Trump. There was actually huge turnout on the Republican side as well. That's why Ted Cruz ended up, somewhat narrowly beating Beto in the Texas Senate race, because he actually mobilized a lot of people as well. We're still at the beginnings of trying to discern what that's all about, really, on a theoretical level. So in that context, it's not entirely surprising that a lot of people would be running, because there's a lot of audience out there for people seeking the presidency right now. And there's no better platform you can have if you're a ambitious politician, even if your chances of actually securing the nomination are somewhat hopeless. if you want to have a vehicle through which to expound a message, if you want to raise money, if you want to appear on TV, if you want to have a book deal, etc., run for president. All the incentives militate toward that. That's why I was a bit surprised that the few people who have opted not to run didn't run. Like Sherrod Brown, people thought was going to run, the senator from Ohio, who just won in 2018. I thought there was a decent chance he would run. He chose not to, but he's kind of the only one, really, who opted out. Maybe also Jeff Merkley, who was a senator from Oregon, who considered a run. But that's not a lot of people who are bowing out. Most people who had any chance in the world of winning the Democratic nomination have decided to run, Bill de Blasio being the latest. And there still might be another one with Stacey Abrams. So you gotta always remember that we're dealing with this wide sentiment of hyper politicization, and I keep somewhat mispronouncing that word, politicization. Anyway, and that's a variable which motivates these people to run, because what do they have to lose? Think back to 2016. A ton of Republicans ran that year. Not the historic, unprecedented number as now, although I think actually 2016 might have broken a record as well. 17 Republicans ran. And you had all these guys who pretty clearly had never had any chance running. Remember Lindsey Graham ran? And did the fact that he totally flamed out harm him ultimately? No. He's actually quite influential now. He's the chairman of the Judiciary Committee in the Senate. He has access to Trump. He's constantly on TV. So the function of him running in 2016 was to elevate his profile, and it worked. It didn't matter that he didn't win. He seized that opportunity that was available to him. Very rarely, actually, does somebody running and losing actually harm them career-wise. I can't, off the top of my head, think of one. I mean, maybe Scott Walker, actually, who was one of the first to drop out in 2016. He dropped out in 2015, actually, who went on to lose re-election in 2018 in Wisconsin. Perhaps his having ran for president had something to do with that. But even there, it's not really straightforward. It could have just as easily energized his supporters in Wisconsin. So, I mean, it's a really open question as to how how running for president could be anything but a rational choice for these people. And one of the other structural factors is you have so many new venues now for media exposure. You don't even need to go to the media to get exposure. You could just put everything on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, and you're out there. I mean, so that's kind of an unprecedented situation we're dealing with in terms of the media ecosystem. Because, yeah, social media was around in 2016, 2012, 2008, but it just keeps growing in influence to the point where we're reaching some kind of critical mass where it's going to probably overtake traditional media at some point in terms of influence with the electorate. That's probably already the case now with younger voters, and people are dying. So if you're a member of Congress and you have somewhat of an idiosyncratic agenda, right? So Seth Moulton is running. He's the Democrat from Massachusetts. He's an Iraq war veteran. He's a little bit more of a moderate. He's been critical of some aspects of the Democratic Party. He challenged Nancy Pelosi for the House speakership unsuccessfully. He wanted to, he did this initiative in 2018 where he recruited military veterans to run for the House, and a lot of them ended up winning. So if you're him, it makes perfect sense for you to run, because that message is just going to get amplified. I mean, you don't even have to make the debates necessarily in order to get value from that investment. Now, in the case of Bill de Blasio, as I mentioned yesterday and as I outlined in this piece, it's a little bit different because he pioneered all these kinds of very assertive fundraising tactics in New York City, which actually got him in legal jeopardy from both state and federal prosecutors. I mean, I'm just going to repeat this because it's so amazing. On March 16th, 2017, the feds and the state prosecutors coordinated this public denunciation of Bill de Blasio because they said although they couldn't actually bring charges against him because of this Supreme Court decision from 2016, which vacated the conviction of Bob McDonnell and narrowed the scope of what constitutes official corruption, they nonetheless wanted to tell the public how horrible Bill de Blasio's conduct was, which is like way overzealous for prosecutors to do. We wouldn't want ordinary citizens to be subjected to that because it really violates their Fourth Amendment rights and, you know, their right to a speedy trial and all that kind of stuff, because you don't have an opportunity to rebut them in a formal setting. You're just kind of left sitting there and just have to take the being maligned in that way. And again, like I mentioned, Hillary was subject to that famously by Comey in 2016, and even arguably Trump. I mean, remember, Bill Barr did not have to release the Mueller report per Department of Justice regulations. He could have just kept it in for himself, but you know, he made a vocal commitment to that during his confirmation hearings to release the report, and he did. But Democrats still aren't satisfied, and held him in contempt in the Judiciary Committee, and are still going wild with him. He just had an interview tonight or today on Fox News where he was, perfectly sensible in saying that there are still outstanding issues around the origins of the Russia investigation. He's attempting to find all the facts, and is then going to present them to the American people. And for some reason, that's this like crazy, really scary authoritarian takeover or something, which is so ridiculous. Anyway, I'm getting off track. So Bill de Blasio has some unique incentives to run for president, given that the cops essentially shut down his fundraising enterprise in New York City. But he pioneered these tactics that he can now take to a national stage. And if you're some out of town business enterprise or entity, and you have some business in New York City, or you have some like pending contract, or some interest in promoting your business endeavors in the context of New York City, the best thing you can do is write a check to Bill de Blasio's presidential campaign, and even his his accompanying nonprofit, because although Bill de Blasio would never admit that you giving him money resulted in official New York City government action being taken to benefit those donors, of course that happens. Because it doesn't even have to be a conspiracy, right? Or anything like consciously nefarious, because you're getting access that way. So if you're writing a check for $2,000 to the Bill de Blasio campaign, you're like, hey, yeah, I have this matter, in New York City that I'd like dealt with. He can say, oh, yeah, I'll get my staff to look into it. And that's all it takes. And now, given how narrow the conception of corrupt actions is for government officials, legally speaking anyway, that's perfectly, viable for de Blasio to do. So he's going to be running around the country, getting donations from donors. A lot of donors, if they give him money, don't even necessarily expect him to win, or they don't even necessarily support him. They just want the access. So again, it makes perfect sense on that level. So that's what we're dealing with. I think people really haven't come to grips with the uniqueness of this political environment. I mean, we see it every day when there's this, some crisis, or Congress is doing something, or Democrats in the House are doing this, overnight reading of the full Mueller report, which they finished at 1:32 a.m. yesterday, as if people were riveted to C-SPAN 3, watching members of Congress read aloud the Mueller report like it's story time in elementary school. Stuff like that, threatening to hold members of Congress in contempt, and even threatening to arrest and jail them. Like, you're going to arrest the Attorney General and put him in a chamber somewhere in the Capitol building. And that's just stuff that's gone on recently. I mean, of course, Trump also contributes to this as well with his, let's say, unorthodox communication style. So So, I mean, that's basically why people are running. There's no reason not to. I mean, some of them have a pet issue, right? So Tulsi, and I don't want to even say pet issue. Some have a core issue that they feel strongly about, that they want to get greater traction. I think Tulsi thinks she has a chance to win, and nobody should be discounted. But she's on the lower rung of the candidates, obviously. But either way, she thinks that her foreign policy critique ought to have greater amplification. So running for president is a perfect vehicle for doing that, and she's gaining a lot of traction. I mean, her appearance on Joe Rogan, last I checked, in less than 1 day, had over 1 million views, or less than 2 days rather, had over 1 million views on YouTube, and I don't know how many podcast downloads. So, that alone is big, right? And some of these people want to get like cabinet secretary positions ultimately if things don't work out and they don't win the primaries and caucuses. Jay Inslee is probably the best example of that. He's running on like a climate change focused campaign. So he'd be a perfect candidate for like Secretary of the Interior or Secretary of Energy or something like that under a Democratic administration. And there are some other examples. Stacey Abrams, if she runs, probably get some kind of high profile position. I mean, she was already recruited to run for the Senate from Georgia, but declined. So you have a lot of examples like that. And, it's just kind of a racket. Consultants encourage candidates to run because by them running, even the most hopeless candidate's going to get some donations, right? So that's a guaranteed payout for these consultants who can pretend like they have the magic potion to get these people, to burnish their image on TV, on the internet. And, they're selling like snake oil, but they get a huge payout. And it doesn't matter if the candidate loses, they still get the money. I mean, did any of the Hillary consultants who had a field day in 2016 have to give back their money? No. They bought, BMWs and lavish vacations with that money. That's just how the system works. I don't know what reform you can institute, but the fact that the process is so protracted, meaning it starts like 2+ years before the election, means you don't even have to be a viable contender at this stage to benefit from the publicity around running. And then, of course, you get the speaking fees. You might even get an MSNBC show down the line. You get these corporate consultancies. Colleges and universities pay you like $30,000 at least to deliver like an hour speech if you're a presidential candidate, because that's a really impressive thing to have in your title, right? So, I mean, that's the system we're dealing with, and I think it's only going to get worse. Or, I mean, I don't know how it could improve at this point. So, yeah, that's what I wanted to say. I'll leave it there for now, and I will talk to you later.